Because there are two stories. There's one story of a prostitute who comes to Jesus, and there's another story of Mary Magdalene, and they get conflated, but they're not the same story. So there's actually a pope. His name eludes me at the moment, but there's a pope at a certain point in time who specifically in I can't remember if it was a sermon or a letter he wrote or a commentary, he conflates the two. But in the Gospels themselves, Mary Magdalene is never described as a prostitute.
Okay. But, and I'll take your word for that. You know a lot more about this than I do. Either way, they also paint her as not, her gospel's not accepted. Her gospel's an interesting story. She's therefore not involved with the church, and they paint her as, you know, just someone who was kind of around Jesus' life or whatever. And they made this is what's always kind of fucked with my head. The church puts this thing on sex, right? Mm-hmm. You have to wait till you're married. It's like this holy, sacred union, whatever. It's run by a bunch of dudes who don't have sex, though. Unless it's the Catholic Church, in which they have some illicit sex with little boys. But I'm saying, like, it's run by people who then say, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to be chaste and whatever. And Jesus, I think there's some talk where he talked about, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but, like, I come from the Father, so I'm married to heaven or whatever, rather than flesh on earth or something like that. But, like, what would be so, like, it seems like the church established at some point, like early on after Jesus' death, the early Christians established that he was this celibate, godlike figure who did not commit the sin of having sex on earth and wasn't married. Why is that so important? I think it's kind of weird that, again, if he's divine, maybe it's not weird. But like on the surface, it's like a 33-year-old dude back then, which is like you're fucking 50. Isn't married and doesn't have kids, that would be an oddity, if anything. Like, why is that such an important part of the Christian church? Frankly, I've always thought that's, like, very stupid. It's just my opinion. But, like, why is that, like, a critical part of the teaching and then makes, like, sex this thing? When in reality, by making sex this thing that's like a no-no, everything's about sex. We call her the Virgin. We call her the Virgin Mary. We talk about the celibate Jesus. The celibate, like, they're making it about sex. You see, like, the paradox, almost the catch-22 in their wording there?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an imbalance that has taken place in terms of maybe the communication of what sex is. I mean, ultimately, sex within Christian and Jewish heritage is a sacred thing. It is a beautiful thing. It is something that God designed. I mean, arguably the first mandate that God gave humanity was be fruitful and multiply. Like, this is something, but the the covenantal understanding of what sex is that it exists within the parameters of something that is holy. In terms of the union, the first covenant was marriage in Genesis, and sex operates within the bounds of what marriage is. Now, the whole issue of celibate priests aside, I'm not a Catholic. I don't think the celibacy in the priesthood was ever a good thing or even a biblical thing.
That's
right. As a Protestant, I believe in the priesthood of all believers. So we don't have that.
Yeah.
And we don't have that because I think that is both incorrect and problematic.
And I agree with you, but also, as you said earlier, to the credit of Protestantism in this case, you guys branched off and took away some things like that, which is great. But you still descend from the people who created that religion, who that was like a part of it.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the status of women, I would actually say the inverse is true, is that, you know, you have this cultural expectation in Greco-Roman antiquity where there is no natural way in classical Latin to say male virgin, because the idea of a male virgin was not a thing. Okay. From an early age, you would have been expected as particularly a Roman male, like a citizen, but not exclusive to that, to have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want, at any time.
Okay.
That would be the expectation. On the inverse side, there are 25 ways to say female prostitute in Latin, because there is this understanding that males, chastity is not a thing. However, you want to be married to a chaste woman. And the women were actually held to a higher standard, and prostitutes were looked down upon, although there is this category of priest prostitutes within the religious system, where you could go and sleep with a priestess, and that would be part of a worship ceremony.
Priestess.
Yeah, yeah. Like in, say, the Temple of Athena, the temple prostitutes were a common thing. But nonetheless, Christianity comes along following Judaism, which has this idea of the sacredness of sex, that sex is something that's beautiful, that's ordained by God for a specific purpose in a specific time for the normative function of both marriage and procreation, but not limited to that. Because you have the book Song of Songs or Songs of Solomon in the Bible, which is basically a giant love poem from Solomon to his lover. Like, that exists within the Bible. It's a thing. Sex has and always will be a beautiful thing within Judeo-Christianity. Now, that goes awry when we try to make it into something where we almost over-sexualize everything.
Yes.
And then if everything is sexual, then it's almost like nothing is sexual.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you in the sense that I think that is problematic. However, Paul then comes along and he actually says, husbands, you need to look after your wife and sacrifice yourself for your wife like Christ did for the church. And Christ died for the church. And Paul actually holds men to the same standard that women are held to within the Roman ethic, and says, no, you can't just go around and sleep with anybody you want. You need to hold to the sacredness of this institution that is going to sit at the bedrock of humanity, in that the first creation mandate was be fruitful and multiply. And so once again, that was seen as countercultural and actually held men to the same agency that women were held to in that day, which was seen as very feminizing to the Romans. They looked at Christianity and they said, this is at minimum, it's stupid.
Yeah.
But what all of this does, going back to what I was saying about Cicero and in chastising Christianity as the religion of women, is because women started to both be given agency and be given an ability of equality within Christianity. And there are some interesting studies that have been done where you can track the agency and rights of women across the ancient world. And it's exactly correlative to Christian missionaries going in previously. So Christian missionaries go into an area, and 5 to 10 years later, the agency of women and them actually being seen in some instances as actually human starts to pop up. And it's because Christianity, although it has not been perfect, has always given a level of credibility to women because it holds to this foundation that we are all created in the image of God.